Before we begin, I want to take just a moment to acknowledge the disaster that occurred this past weekend just north of Philadelphia. My wife and I live about five miles from the Pennsylvania line, so this was too close to home. And there's a lot of work that's been going on, and I know our witness today, Shaylin, has been up there for quite a time, and we'll hear a little bit about that as well. But on Sunday, a tanker truck carrying some 8,500 gallons of gasoline caught fire on the off-ramp, causing an overpass on I-95 literally to collapse, as we've probably all seen on television. Administrator Bott, who also goes by Administrator Bat, but I've always called him Administrator Bott, has already been to the site of the crash, I think a couple of times. He and his team are working to support state officials there as they seek to restore mobility on this critical corridor for our nation. I call I-95 is sort of like our nation's highway. It goes all the way from Maine all the way down to Florida, and the amount of traffic on that, which goes through my state, is just incredible. I want to thank our administrator and the rest of his team at the Federal Highway Administration for the important work that you are doing. We appreciate very much you being with us today. It's been a little more than 2 years since this committee unanimously marked up the highway bill that will go on to serve as the foundation of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And when we did, we noted that it included historic funding for our nation's highway programs. I also noted that it was included the first ever climate title in a bill of that nature. In our highway bill, we created the Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation, also known as the PROTECT program. We did so with the intent of improving the resilience of our transportation systems and reducing our vulnerability to extreme weather. We've all heard of the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's certainly the case with investments in resilience. Building the protective features and natural infrastructure helps keep transportation assets to withstand disasters for years. And the earlier those protections are in place, the greater the benefit will be. With that in mind, I'm pleased that the Federal Highway Administration is now accepting applications for the first round of the PROTECT grants. It's my hope that the Federal Highway Administration works quickly to award these programs funds and begins to improve the resilience of the communities nationwide. Our bill also creates dedicated programs to develop electric vehicle or EV charging networks across our country. It also includes a 70% increase in funding for programs to build safe, accessible pedestrian and bicycle pathways across our country. In addition, our service transportation bill authorized the Reconnecting Communities program. This was the first ever federal program to address the safety and pollution impacts of highways that are divided and hurt neighborhoods in many places across our country. Importantly, not only did our highway bill focus on the critical issues of climate, safety, and equity, but it did so in a lasting, bipartisan way. As my colleagues have heard me say, Shaylin, a million times, bipartisan solutions are lasting solutions. We're very proud that that's the approach we took with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. But during that markup 2 years ago, I also noted that the infrastructure bill alone was not enough to address climate change. And once we passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, we got to work on legislation that eventually became the Inflation Reduction Act. Inflation Reduction Act authorized several new programs under the purview of the Federal Highway Administration. And this included a program to reduce the industrial emissions from construction materials, as well as funding to facilitate efficient environmental review and permitting times. The Inflation Reduction Act also provided funds to mitigate air, noise, and water pollution and other impacts on highway infrastructure on disadvantaged communities. And together, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act represent the most significant investment in clean energy and transportation infrastructure, as well as equity and climate resilience in our nation's history. Still, there's no shortage of work that remains to be done. There are key questions that the Federal Highway Administration must address around implementation, around regulation, and guidance. And that's why I'm delighted here to welcome our friend, not just from Delaware, but a friend who's actually been Secretary of Transportation in Delaware, in Colorado. He's worked with, I think, with US DOT and any number of other responsible positions to prepare him for this day. This is his first time before our committee since the Senate confirmed his nomination to be Administrator of the Federal Highway Administration by voice vote in December 2022. We look forward to hearing your testimony today about the extensive work that you've led in the last 6 months or so. As I've noted, Congress provided the Federal Highway Administration with historic funding and the authorities necessary to revitalize highways across our country. The agency must also use its regulatory authority to address ongoing needs. One such need for regulation is to help reduce emissions from our transportation sector, which account for nearly 30% of our nation's greenhouse gas emissions, the largest single source in our economy. As my recollection, 30% of our emissions come from the cars, the vehicles, the trucks that we drive, cars, mobile sources. Another 25% comes from our power plants across the country, and another roughly 20% comes from our manufacturing base or manufacturing operations. But the biggest of those three is our roads, highways, and bridges. Last July, the Federal Highway Administration proposed a rule that would require states and metropolitan areas to measure their performance on greenhouse gas emissions and set targets to reduce those emissions. Once finalized, this will be a critical tool to steer infrastructure investments toward better climate outcomes, and I hope that the agency will move quickly to finalize that rule. And finally, I'd like to emphasize the importance of improving safety. Last year, nearly 40,000 people tragically lost their lives on our nation's roads, the highest number in 16 years. I'll say that again. Last year, nearly 43,000 people tragically lost their lives on our nation's roads, the highest number in 16 years. The U.S. Department of Transportation has taken an important step toward this goal by releasing its National Roadway Safety Strategy, which sets a goal of 0 fatalities for U.S. roads for the first time. 0 for the first time. Still, there's more work to do that the Federal Highway Administration can and should be doing to prioritize safety. That includes working with states, working with metropolitan areas, to plan streets that are safe or safer for all users, and choosing highway designs and roadway designs that don't encourage speeding or other unsafe behavior. With that, we look forward to hearing about the work that Administrator Bott has done and will continue to do to advance these priorities.